All right. First rule of this channel, we not talk about this channel. Second rule of this channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the after cut day video. Probably a lot more stuff that went on today than actually yesterday when it comes to cuts, and that's kind of not to be not expected when it comes to that. So I want to get this stuff done before I can go to bed tonight, and we're gonna get after it. So after yesterday, me saying like, oh, Jamar Chase would be pretty safe because he showed up practice. Well, like he didn't practice today, so obviously at this point, like I probably would be staying away from him. I had my high school league, that's the less competitive league of the two. They went gonzo style and just said, hey, 7 o'clock we're drafting digitally, so get there or be square. We did the draft. I talked to my co-manager, said we're absolutely taking Jamar Chase off our board. Didn't have to worry about that at 5 overall, but like that was just the idea, like probably way too risky. You have no idea if he is or is not going to show up, like what's going to go on with his health, with his production, how many actual games you're going to get out of him, any of that stuff that's going to go on. So like, unless magically, and if you're in a real league and you're going to draft 30 minutes before kickoff on Thursday, what I would be doing with him, and this is just me, you can do whatever you want, but I think it's way too much risk. Probably should be going in a different direction. Probably a guy that's a little bit capped in the first place. That obviously, if everything was like in a vacuum, should be a first round draft pick in fantasy, but overall, probably should be someone else's problem. That's what I would be thinking. From my perspective, and that was from yesterday, going I think he's safe because it does look like he's going to prepare for week 1, and now it doesn't. So I can't predict that, and I can't take advantage of it. So anyway, moving on. Iosivas should be the guy that I would be going after, and I did draft him, and I'm expecting to hold on to him going into week 1, because if there's something that we can kind of guess on and predict ahead of time that there's going to be shenanigans, there is a theoretical vacated number 1 attached to Joe Burrow. And going after the guy that's going to be the cheapest to find out is going to probably be Iosivas in a lot of leagues. Now that could end up being Jermaine Burton, that I think is kind of capped. From what I was hearing, he's having problems with the playbook and integrating it into the offense, so not going to be moved in the slot. I could definitely see him, being the starter in on the outside to go along with T. Higgins, and then Iosivas is going to be in the slot. But again, if there's a guy I'm going to be throwing my dart at, it's going to be Iosivas. I think this would vault Burton up into that fringe wide receiver 3 dart throw range in deeper leagues. And then Gesicki's going to be the guy that's ain't going to break your heart because he's a tight end. So, if he can start getting into that 7 or 8 target range, he's going to get really interesting. And he's kind of just a big wide receiver in the first place, but he's going to have tight end designation. So again, the two guys that I would be really interested based off of this would be Gesicki and Iosivas, and then probably Burton last. And then, you're going to have to pay for T. Higgins. And I think T. Higgins is going to be a little bit capped out in that high end wide receiver 3 range, or solid wide receiver 2 range, even if Jamar Chase ends up, missing time. So again, probably you're going to have to pay for T. Higgins. And that's something you're not going to have to do with Iosivas, Gesicki, or Burton at this point. All right, moving on to the 49ers. And I didn't bring this up yesterday because I didn't think it was necessarily interesting, but Terrace Marshall was a surprise cut from the Panthers. He signs with the San Francisco practice squad. Now, right now, that's probably nothing to be looking at. A little bit promising when he was coming out of LSU, but now, probably not. But what this gets a little interesting with is this Brandon Ayuk situation. So yesterday, it looked like he was going to practice. He didn't practice today. So now, he's probably too risky. Should probably be someone else's problem. And he was going to be capped out in that, the very efficient wide receiver 2 range. That's just generally how I look at him in the first place. So very difficult for him to win me a league. And now I can't even predict what I'm going to get if I spend capital on him in the first place. So unless he tumbles multiple rounds into that range, probably the 6th round or something like that, I wouldn't even touch him with your roster at this point. I don't think this necessarily upgrades Deebo at all. If there's a guy that's going to upgrade, it's going to be George Kittle, because now we can start talking about unicorn George Kittle season. When it comes to Deebo, he's going to run those horizontal routes. He's a good wide receiver. He may have lost a step. I'm not trying to say any of that. Not a real football channel. This is a fantasy football channel. But again, where his value is going to be the running inside zone as a wide receiver, so you get rushing touchdowns, and the yak yard is from running horizontal targets and breaking tackles. So he doesn't necessarily translate to go into that Brandon Ayuk role in this offense. So if there's a guy that I expect to get peppered with targets besides CMC, it's going to be George Kittle. If you're wondering about good old Ricky Pearsall stepping into that role, I think that's a fine dart pick. He's a first round draft pick. He's really good at football. I liked him a lot. I had him really high. I would project him much higher next year, because we can project that Deebo's going to leave, even if Brandon Ayuk's not back. Interesting guy in that 120, 150 target range next year. Now, this year, right now, they went out and they signed their third wide receiver. And this is really interesting because the 49ers, and I couldn't find the actual stats on this, but the 49ers are notorious as a team that does not run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. They come out 2 tight ends. They come out with a Kyle Juszczyk, their fullback, a lot too, like 50% of the time. So they're in 2 tight ends, they're in 2 running backs. So the third wide receiver doesn't have that much value. They went out and they signed Jauan Jennings, their wide receiver 3, to a 2-year, $15.4 million with $10 million guaranteed. So that's wide receiver 3 money. And it's almost like they were looking into the future, and they saw that something was going to go on with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, and they wanted to lock up Jauan Jennings. So I don't necessarily think this moves Jauan Jennings up outside of like wide receiver 3 range. So like deeper drafts, like maybe you can go after him deeper league, something along those lines. Ricky Pearsall is going to be fun and all, but like, that's why like Terrace Marshall gets a little interesting on the outside. I don't think that like Terrace Marshall is going to move anywhere up outside of like that, fun wide receiver 3 range in this offense. So like, a little bit more safety with Ricky Pearsall as being the target guy in this offense. But like, I could definitely see that Jauan Jennings is going to just slip in to that role. George Kittle's going to get an uptick in targets. Jauan Jennings isn't going to be fantasy relevant. Deebo's kind of get probably a slight uptick in targets. I don't think this moves him into league winner range. That would be George Kittle if you're going to go after any of these guys in this case. And then, Ricky Pearsall, if you're in those deeper leagues and you just want that like 6 to 7 target a game type of upside wide receiver, that would be Ricky Pearsall at that point in those deeper leagues. All right. So moving on to the running back room. So I said this yesterday with D'Onta Foreman, really interesting that the Browns would release him, only had 2 guys on the roster. I can see that Pierre Strong theoretically could end up being in that Kareem Hunt role, but the news is today that like the Browns are either going to bring D'Onta Foreman back or they're going to go get another running back, and that would probably downgrade Jerome Ford from like theoretically being like league winner to like being what we thought he was going to be before Nick Chubb comes back. Remember, even if Nick Chubb is not the Nick Chubb, as long as he's like stealing, vulturing touchdowns from Jerome Ford, like that's going to make this backfield like really difficult to be anything more than like a serviceable RB2 in this range. So Dalvin Cook yesterday, we talked about this, that he showed up, had a meeting with the Cowboys. He signed their practice squad. At this point, what this is telling me is like, I want to stay away from this backfield. This is a 4-headed monster running back by committee. I imagine that he's going to show up and play, if for no other reason than to sell tickets. And at that point, like, I'm just not interested anymore. So the possibility that Rico Dowdle is going to win leagues, or that like Zeke is going to be some type of sneaky running back vulture attached to good offense, I think is like relatively low at this point. And then the big news, Samaje Perine, he does sign with the Chiefs. Why this is a big deal, and I was tracking this all off season. So them running Kadarius Toney as a running back in the red zone. This is just how the Chiefs are set up. That like they throw a lot in the red zone. They don't necessarily run the football. So the idea that we're going to get like some design receiving work with Pacheco, that was never on the table. What we were generally looking at is Pacheco was going to end up being the red zone guy attached to a good offense. Now I don't think that's going to happen because with Carson Steele making the roster, I maybe was expecting that this was a slight upgrade to Pacheco because Deneric Prince got cut. But like with Samaje Perine coming in, now this makes me think this is going to be the guy that they're going to run in the goal line. This is going to be like the red zone guy. And then in this case, like Pacheco is going to get like some red zone usage instead of just being the guy that's going to get the majority of the red zone usage. We're going to be buying a guy with Pacheco that was going to be capped because of Kelsey and Rashee Rice in the red zone because they throw a lot in the first place. And then if they're going to bring Samaje Perine in, which I imagine they're going to do at this point, because this is what he does. He pass blocks, he catches the football, and he thumps in the red zone. So like this is like probably actually moves him up into like fringe RB2 range just because of the situation that he's going to. So again, if you're into that type of thing, that's going to be going on. All right, quarterbacks. I saw this yesterday. I forgot to talk about it. Malik Willis, he gets traded to the Packers. Probably going to downgrade the toys if he has to step in, but he's going to end up being fringe fantasy relevant because of the rushing upside. Other things that went on, Taylor Heinicke got traded to the Chargers. I generally think that like this is an upgrade if Justin Herbert goes down, but like, I don't know. Like it's just one of those things that occurred, and I thought it was a little interesting. Jamison Williams. So rumors and why sometimes that they're bad and sometimes they're good. And I like to take advantage of murky situations where I don't have to put in a lot of capital. Jameis Winston. So the rumors that they were trying to trade him, I guess, are false. They are expecting to keep him. And I was talking about this in the offseason. Would not be surprised that Jameson Winston finishes the season as not only fantasy relevant, but as the starting quarterback. Well, I guess that the starting quarterback for the Browns in fantasy relevant. So again, this keeps that on track. And I imagine once they figure out like their 3 quarterbacks that they're going to keep, they're going to use that roster spot to go bring in some type of running back in the future. So the last thing to talk about, Russell Wilson was named the week 1 starter. He was fringe fantasy relevant last year because he has the ability to fall in the end zone. And if he's throwing passing touchdowns, this is probably going to be a conservative offense. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, if you can get a guy that's going to fall in the end zone and throw some touchdown passes, I can definitely see that's going to happen with Russell Wilson. So he's going to be interesting as a streamer from a week-to-week standpoint. But again, if you have the ability in your deeper leagues to be stashing your Justin Fields, because, you know, if you can get that cheat code quarterback attached to this offense with Arthur Smith, I think that would be the guy to go after. So probably doesn't change a lot for me. Like Russell Wilson being the week 1 starter would upgrade George Pickens, downgrade Muth because Russ just doesn't throw to the middle of the field. And if Justin Fields ends up being the starting quarterback, he did throw or see a proclivity to throw to his tight end. So again, that would upgrade Muth, maybe downgrade George Pickens if you're into that type of thing overall. So like I would still, if you have the ability to stash your Justin Fields or wait on Justin Fields to eventually take over the position, like that could still theoretically happen. So I don't think this changes too much from that perspective. And finally, wide receiver room. So yesterday, Tim Patrick, he signed with the Lions practice squad. Allen Robinson, he goes out and signs with the Lions practice squad. What's that tell me? Well, they want that big body X that's going to run block on the outside and, you know, run clear out routes. So this doesn't necessarily change anything for Jameson Williams. It doesn't change anything with that one when it comes to him. I was always expecting him to run about 70% snaps this year. I still expect that he's going to do that. It just gives me a better idea of like what the offense is going to look like. And I would rather have Jameson Williams running that 70% snaps and be used efficiently than them trying to, you know, magically turn him into an every down player where he's going to get like less efficient touches. He's still going to be in that like boom bust wide receiver 3 range. This just tells me more and more that the Lions want, you know, a full-time X on the field to go along with Jameson Williams. All right. Noah Brown, he gets cuts from the Texans. He signs with the Commanders. He's going to step in probably, and well, shouldn't say probably. I imagine he's going to end up taking over that wide receiver 2 spot because they ain't got anybody else in the roster. Downgrades Luke McCaffrey from being a guy that you could maybe throw a dart throw at. You know, I wouldn't necessarily be throwing a dart at Noah Brown at this point, but like theoretically, you know, we could be looking at like a guy that could even go up into like wide receiver 2 range down the line. This is something to be monitoring in general because they needed that number 2, and now we can kind of guess what that number 2 is going to be. And then finally, we're with Rashee Rice, and I wanted to bring this up. Like I saw this multiple sources after I went and looked it up. I saw it on Twitter. That the NFL is not going to put him on the exempt list. They're going to let this play out. From what I could see is he has a civil trial date. And from what I was hearing in the offseason, there is no criminal trial date. So if there's no criminal trial date, that means that there's still some shenanigans going on when it comes to like charges and witnesses and stuff like that. So like they have to set that trial date. Once they set the trial date, then we can start speculating. But if there's no trial date, like the NFL is going to let it play out. And that means like if there's no trial date during the season, that's going to happen after the season. So if you're into that type of thing, he would be the one guy that I think if he's going to have a role in the offense, you know, he's going to be red zone guy. And, you know, at the price that he's going at, like I would probably say he's going to be the safest guy. Not going to have, or going to be a little bit capped. You know, if you're going up after upside, that's going to be like Worthy or Hollywood Brown at this race. But like, you know, to be the number 2 attached to the Patrick Mahomes, probably not a bad idea. And he's going to get red zone usage. So yeah, this is probably a big thing. The rumors are coming out that that's what's going on, and it's multiple sources. So I generally would tend to look at that. So anyway, that's about all I got for today. I'm sure there's going to be more fallout tomorrow, and I'll get onto that.